And welcome to the Beyond the Dollar Signs podcast with your host, Mark Taylan. Mark, it's nice to see you again.
Hi, Bill. It's great to see you as well.
No, I enjoy our visits, and today's topic is a little bit of a tough one. It addresses the subject of loss, and it's a loss way more profound than losing some dollars in your portfolio. So let me hand it over to you on that note, Mark.
Yeah, today we're going to talk about what happens when you lose a spouse, the emotional and financial decision, and the emotional and financial decisions that follow that. You know, I've had the privilege of working with many couples over my career. And, you know, and for my existing clients, there comes a point in time when we're doing the financial planning that we do have to talk about survivorship, you know, and it's not usually a comfortable conversation, but it's a necessary one. And, you know, that is what happens when one of you two is not here anymore. You know, what's the plan around that? You know, I noticed that especially with clients when they're getting older and they're facing mortality, it certainly it weighs on them very heavily of, you know, what happens to my family, my spouse when I'm gone. And it really does. They're really concerned about that. They really want to know, you know, is everything in place? And I have several clients that spend a lot of time, you know, making sure that everything is in order. And I think that gives them a lot of peace of mind. I also have had the privilege of working with clients that haven't been my clients, but they've come to me after the loss of a spouse, and whether that's been after a prolonged illness or a sudden death that they engage with me. You know, it's a little bit more challenging, of course, because I don't have any context of the family dynamics or the financial situation, but it's certainly something that, you know, it does happen. And, you know, people really need guidance when it comes to that event.
Yeah, so let's break this down a little bit because I think that might be instructive. You mentioned you've been working with, there are clients that you work with that have experienced this loss. So for those clients who've been with you and that you've been working with them, what do you suggest to them in terms of coming to terms with this loss?
Boy, it's a really tough one. They need to allow themselves the time to grieve, you know, and not make any rash, you know, there's not any urgent financial things that need to be done if we've done the right type of planning. You know, part of the process and planning is, you know, the big long-term goals, but the immediate things that we know that need to happen. For a lot of these clients, I hope that I remind them is that we've done the planning for this. Everything's in place. You should feel at ease knowing that we've planned for this to happen. And we're here for you. You know, we're here for you to guide you. That's what my role is to help support you and the family. And so hopefully that there's a lot of comfort in that for those clients that I work with already.
Yeah. And I know some people who've gone through some profound personal losses, people, family who have died. And I want to underscore a point you just made, take the time to grieve. There is no timeline. Some of us grieve and recover more quickly than others, and others just take more time. There isn't a timeline there, is there, Mark?
There really isn't. And I tell you, it really, you know, it takes years, right? I mean, you've been with your partner often for decades, most of your life in many cases. And it's not an easy transition. You know, and even for me, it's a difficult transition because I'm used to meeting with the couple for many years, you know, decades, 2 decades in some cases, you know, and to see their experience and also for me to grieve in a sense too, because, you know, I'm so used to have gotten to know the family. They're like family to me. And so I think about all the, you know, interactions I've had with them, getting to know them, and now they're gone. And now it's my role. I take it as my role to continue and do my part to help support, you know, the surviving spouse.
Yeah. What about people who come to you for the first time, new clients? How do you counsel them on this?
You know, really the same way in a lot of senses, right? Take the time to grieve. It's a lot of times when people come to me right away, right after that, the spouse has passed,
Mm.
I just don't think they're in the right headspace at that time to really make decisions. I believe that, they want some comfort, of course, knowing things that are going to be okay.
Yeah.
And I try to do that without going into really complex planning. One of the things that I think they need to do immediately, if they haven't done it already, is do the immediate things. Pay the bills, make sure the expenses are taken care of, the income, notifications to certain agencies like Social Security. Certain things need to be done immediately,
Yeah.
but the longer term planning and the other things can wait.
Yeah. And both of these cases in different ways underscore the importance of preparing for this sort of event, because this is
Mhm.
an event. We don't like to acknowledge it. Many of us don't like to admit to being mortal. But
Mhm.
this is a moment you can prepare for, and I would imagine that if those who are prepared are much better shape to cope and find some solace in that preparation.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Often as I'm going through the process with clients, not only do we identify, the financial plan or what we're going to do in the event of a death, but we start to identify, which family members or who their support system is, right? And so, a lot of times the client later in life has adult children at that time.
Yeah,
Who are the people that are going to come in to support them? And often I do recommend that. It's like who is your support group? And I know who the key people that they've identified. Typically in a trust, I've reviewed the family trust, and so I know who the family has felt confident with to help assist. Oh, this is who would help so and so in the event for financial concerns or financial any financial changes. This would be the person they would lean on. And
yeah.
that's when we bring the family members or the trusted people in with those clients. It's really a support group, right? And I think it's so important that in the process we identify not only what the strategy is, but who are the key people that may step in.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. So, can you give your listeners some insight on some of the topics that need to be addressed that you think they should sit down and you need to talk to people about?
Yeah, there are, when the time is right, we talk about survivorship and what happens with the loss of a spouse from a financial standpoint. One of the things that let me give you a few things that you're definitely going to need to address. Number one is the income, right? Typically, with the loss of a spouse, there potentially is a loss of income, meaning that if they're both drawing Social Security or a pension, potentially one of those, things or both could be gone at this point. So it's
Yeah.
really important to understand, the income dynamics and how that may have changed with the loss of a spouse. Certainly there are some expenses that you need to discuss. You maybe some final expenses, but what are the immediate expenses going forward? And how does that translate
Mm.
to, the planning that we've done from a paperwork and account standpoint. You definitely need to review the titling of accounts. Maybe they're joint accounts and now they need to be individual accounts. Maybe there's retirement accounts that you are the beneficiary of. We need to discuss that. And there's some administrative work that needs to be done there. In addition to that, from a taxation standpoint, there's cost basis, meaning that typically some assets get reevaluated when one spouse dies, not only investment assets, but real estate. Um, and two more things I would say is the estate planning. If a living trust has been in place, normally what happens is you remove the deceased spouse, and that's a good time to evaluate who are the people that may step up because now instead of two, they're one. So usually the other spouse is the one that would administer for or can make decisions for the other. Now it's time for that trust is the work that you've or the
Mm.
people that you've selected to step in. And finally, once those kind of administrative things are done, it's time to, and this takes time, is where do you go from here? How are your goals different now with you walking the path alone? And how does that impact the financial plan? So, that discussion needs to happen at some point. But I don't think, there's, like you said, there's really not a timeline for that. But at some
Mhm.
point, it does need to be discussed because things change, right? And life changes, and maybe you've got all sorts of things that you're thinking about. Maybe I'm going to sell this house. Maybe I'm going to move closer to my children. So and that's going to impact everything.
Yeah, I know these are difficult conversations to have, and I know that a lot of people don't want to talk about, well, what happens if something happens to me? It's an uncomfortable conversation. But this conversation that we're having right now highlights the importance of that, because if you've had this conversation with your clients, they're used to having the conversation and they're prepared for the loss. And I would imagine those people feel a little less disoriented than people who have not made any preparation, who've not taken care to get their affairs in order, knowing, because look, it's a fact, isn't it, Mark? We're all going to leave. We're all
That's
going to
right.
leave. We don't know what time we're going to leave, but we all are going to leave at some point.
Yeah, I think it's really the peace of mind knowing that you have a plan in place, right? And a
Right.
dynamic that I see often is, husband, wife in the later stages, maybe one of them primarily dominates the finances, the expenses, and financial decisions, right? And that's very common in a relationship.
Sure.
And so they're worried that maybe my spouse that hasn't been engaged as much as I have in the finances, and certainly she's been part of the planning, but not the day-to-day finances. And so, they're really, really concerned about that. But I think, and I spend a lot of time making sure that everybody's on the same page, not only the spouse, but at some point also integrating the family, the adult children, that they understand the plan. And when that discussion is ready to happen, I help facilitate that to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And I think for existing clients and even for myself, I've had that discussion with my children. I think everybody feels much more at ease, and quite frankly, some children aren't ready to have that conversation. And I've seen that as well, right? They don't want to think about mom and dad not being here. They're not ready to face that. But,
Yeah.
at some point, these discussions, I believe there's a lot of benefit and peace of mind for that to happen for clients.
So as we're wrapping up this episode, do you have any closing thoughts? And I guess my last question to you is, how do you prompt that question for people before they've had the loss? How do you sort of nudge people into recognizing certain realities, this being one of them, and the necessity for being prepared for it?
I think it's a really good conversation when we're talking about estate planning and the living
Mm.
trust, right? It's very fresh in their mind because through the process of the living trust, they've had to make decisions about end of life decisions, whether they want to, be resuscitated and be on, what is it? Gosh, on
A
life
living
support,
will?
right? Life support.
Life
If
support, yeah.
so when you're talking about mortality and you have to make decisions, end of life decisions, and put it on a document, it's really fresh in their mind. Like, wow, these are really, important decisions. And why are they important decisions? Because, you want to be able to control what happens to you. And a lot of times you don't want your children to have to make that difficult decision, right? They
Right.
want to, if you've made it
Yeah.
already. So I find that when we're reviewing living trust and end of life and and the process of what would happen, I think that's a great time to really discuss this topic in particular because it's fresh in their mind. They're thinking about it.
No, that's a really, really good point. And for people who are listening to this podcast, Mark, who are not already clients of yours, if they're listening to this and thinking you might be somebody they would like to talk with about these kinds of things, and what is the best way for them to reach out and get a hold of you?
Well, I'd like to say, the loss of a spouse is overwhelming, but you don't have to navigate it alone. You have plenty of people around that you can reach out to support you. If you yourself are going through that process or know of anybody, please reach out to us and our team, and we'd love to, help at least have a discussion of, some of the things that you should be aware of and potentially do in the future.
And what's the best way for them to reach you, Mark?
The best way to reach me is really just calling our office or sending us an email, and that'll be at the bottom of the show notes today.
Okay. Yeah. For those of you who are listening to this, who don't have a pen and paper ready to go, it's in the show notes. So, and that's not going anywhere. You can access that. You can access that at any time. The other thing you can do is, if you're not a subscriber already, become one. Hit that follow button. That way, every time Mark has a new episode, you'll be notified and you can give it a listen. I would also ask that you like the podcast. I mean, if you, tell people about it. If you like it, share it with other people, because word of mouth promotion is an incredibly valuable tool for promotion, and we would very much appreciate it. So until next time, I'm Bill Tucker on behalf of Mark and everybody at 360 Advisors. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Dollar Signs, Financial Clarity. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at www.advisors360pwm.com or give us a call at 408-778-8280. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Advisors 360. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.